AITA for calling out my parents after my dad accused me of choosing money over my ill mom? I'm Kinsley, 39, and for most of my adult life I was the daughter who remembered things. Medication refills, birthday cakes, appointment dates, which bill my parents had called temporary 3 months earlier, which utility Fallon had forgotten to pay during one of her rough patches, which relative needed a card, which prescription mom couldn't take with grapefruit juice. I'm married to Mason, who is 41, and we have 2 kids who are old enough to read something on a phone but not old enough to understand why a grandfather would publicly shame their mother. That distinction ended up mattering more than I ever thought it would. I was never the favorite daughter. Fallon was. I was the reliable daughter. In my family, those were 2 completely different jobs. Fallon is 7 years younger than me. Growing up, if she forgot something, there was always an explanation. If I forgot something, it became evidence of a character flaw. Fallon was overwhelmed. I should have planned better. Fallon was sensitive. I should have been more patient. Fallon needed encouragement. I was strong. Dad loved that word. You're strong, Kinsley. Usually it meant, you can absorb this inconvenience without making the rest of us uncomfortable. When I was younger, I wore that label like it was a compliment. By my 30s, I had started to realize it was often just a convenient way to assign me whatever nobody else wanted to handle. Mom Sylvia was different from Dad. She wasn't as controlling, and she didn't play favorites as openly, but she went along with the family pattern. She would say things like, your sister just needs a little more help, or, you know how Fallon gets. And because I did know how Fallon got, I usually helped. I covered small things, fixed plans, sent money, smoothed over arguments, reminded people of appointments they had agreed to make themselves. Then Mom's health started getting worse. I'm not going to put her medical history on display because that was part of what made me so angry about all of this in the first place. What matters is that she needed more help than she used to. There were medication copays, medical supplies delivered to the house, a bathroom safety rail, and eventually a part-time caregiver for a few shifts. It wasn't catastrophic care, but it was enough that the expenses started adding up and the logistics got complicated. I stepped into the role everyone expected me to step into. I kept a little spiral notebook in my kitchen drawer. I wrote down medication refill dates, the caregiver's contact information, which invoice had been paid, what Mom was waiting on, and the dates of a few upcoming appointments. First, I didn't mind. She was my mother. She needed help. I paid some medication copays directly. I paid the installer for the bathroom rail. I covered a few caregiver shifts when Dad said money was tight. When a medical supply company sent an invoice, I paid them instead of sending cash to my parents. That last part turned into the beginning of the real problem. Dad wanted everything to go through him. He called it Mom's Care Fund. The first time he mentioned it, it sounded reasonable. He said it would be easier if everyone who wanted to help just sent money into one account and let him handle expenses from there. Your mother deserves dignity, he told me. She shouldn't have to know every time somebody pays for something. I said I understood, but I was happy to keep paying bills directly. He immediately got irritated. Why do you always make things complicated? I'm not making it complicated. Send me the invoice and I'll pay it. That's not the point. I remember standing at my kitchen counter with my phone tucked between my shoulder and ear, looking at the notebook open in front of me. What is the point then? The point is that I'm here with her. I know what she needs. Okay, so tell me what she needs. He sighed like I was being deliberately difficult. Medicine adds up. Food adds up. Care adds up. Everything adds up. Then send me the bills. There was a pause. Then he said, you always need everything itemized like family is a business. That line became one of his favorites. The thing was, I didn't need every grocery receipt. I wasn't asking for an audit because he spent $9 on soup. I just didn't want to hand over thousands of dollars with no explanation. That wasn't unreasonable to me. Apparently it was to him. Around the same time, Fallon was planning her wedding to Drew. Originally, she said they were going to keep it simple. Small venue, manageable guest list, nothing Pinterest insane, as she put it. Then gradually things got bigger. A nicer venue. More elaborate flowers. A catering upgrade. A larger bar package. A photographer she had previously complained was too expensive. I noticed because Fallon called me to talk about every decision, usually after she had already made it. I know it's more than we planned, she said about the flowers, but you only do this once. A week later, she used the same phrase about the venue. Dad seemed weirdly relaxed about it. At one family lunch, Drew joked that he had been sweating over one of the deposits until Dad came through at the last second. I assumed Dad had given Fallon some of his own money. That was normal. Dad had always found a way to help Fallon. I didn't love the pattern, but it was their money. I had learned a long time ago that if I questioned what my parents gave my sister, I would be accused of keeping score. So I let it go. Then Dad asked me for $15,000. Not $1,500. $15,000. He called on a Tuesday evening while Mason was cleaning up after dinner, and the kids were arguing about whose turn it was to feed the dog. Dad's tone was already tight before he even got to the number. "We need to talk about your mother." That sentence could still make my stomach drop. What happened? Nothing happened. That's the problem. We're trying to prevent something from happening. I sat down. What does she need? The care fund is low. How low? Low enough that I'm worried. Okay, what bills are coming up? He ignored that. I need you to put $15,000 into the account. I actually thought I had misheard him. 15. Yes. For what? He gave a sharp little laugh. For your mother, Kinsley. I understand that. What expenses? Care. What kind of care? Do you hear yourself? Yes. Your mother is sick, and you want me to defend every dollar. No. I want to know what a $15,000 request is for. It's for stability. That's not a bill. He got angry then. He told me he was exhausted. He told me I didn't understand what it was like being the person in the house with her. He told me he was sacrificing every day while I got to drop in with a check and feel useful. That hurt, partly because I knew caregiving was hard and partly because he had deliberately reduced everything I had been doing to something shallow. I kept my voice calm. I'm not refusing to help Mom. I'm refusing to write a blank check. It is not a blank check. It is family. Then send me the upcoming invoices. Unbelievable. He hung up on me. Mason had heard enough from the other side of the kitchen to know what happened. He dried his hands and said, 15,000? Yeah. For what? That's what I asked. He stared at me. I gave him a tired look. Don't. I didn't say anything. You were about to. I was about to say that no normal person gets offended when someone asks what $15,000 is for. I closed the notebook. I know. Do you? That irritated me. Of course I do. He sat across from me. Kinsley, every time your dad pulls this, you spend 3 days trying to convince yourself he meant something nicer than what he actually said. That was a hard sentence to hear because it was just true enough that I wanted to argue with it. I didn't. Instead I said, Mom still needs help. Then help her. Pay the people providing the help. That's what I'm doing. Good. At the time that felt like the end of it. It wasn't. The next morning Fallon called. She didn't ask how I was doing. She said, "What is wrong with you?" I almost laughed. "Good morning to you too. Dad told me what you did." "What did I do?" "You basically told him you don't trust him." I told him I wasn't sending $15,000 without knowing what it was for. Mom is sick. I know. I'm paying some of her bills. You always do this. Do what? Turn everything into some control thing. That was rich enough that I stopped unloading the dishwasher. I'm not controlling anything. I'm asking what I'm paying for. You know Dad is stressed. I know. And the wedding is already stressful enough. Everybody is stretched thin. That sentence caught my attention. What does your wedding have to do with Mom's care fund? Nothing. I'm saying the family is under pressure. Okay. She got quieter. Dad already found a way to help with the things he promised. You don't need to make everything harder right now. I remember the exact way she said it because later I replayed that sentence in my head. At the time, though, I thought she meant Dad had worked out his own budget. I said, "Fallon, if Mom needs a caregiver shift covered, send me the invoice. If she needs medication, send me the pharmacy details. If there's equipment, send me the bill. I am not refusing to help. You're making Dad beg." "No. I'm asking him to explain a $15,000 request. You are exhausting." Then she hung up too. For the next week, Dad didn't call me directly. Instead, relatives started reaching out. Not aggressively at first. A cousin sent, "Everything okay with your mom?" An uncle called and awkwardly said Dad seemed really overwhelmed. Maureen, my aunt, asked if I could maybe meet him halfway. That phrase annoyed me. Halfway between what and what? She hesitated. "Well, he feels like you've backed away. I paid Mom's caregiver invoice 2 days ago." "Oh." "I also paid her medication copays last week." Another pause. "Well, maybe he means emotionally." That was how it always worked. If one accusation didn't survive contact with facts, the accusation changed. Money became attitude. Attitude became tone. Tone became family loyalty. I still didn't understand how far Dad had taken it until Haley sent me a screenshot. Haley is my cousin, and she normally avoids family conflict like it's contagious. Her message said, "I think you need to see this before somebody else sends it to you." Below that was Dad's Facebook post. It was long. I read it twice because the first time my brain kept rejecting the words. He wrote about the pain of watching a spouse struggle with her health. He wrote about sacrifice. He wrote about how some people reveal what matters to them when family needs them most. Then he named me. Not vaguely. Not one of my children. Kinsley. He wrote that I had chosen money over my sick mother. He said he had asked me for help and I had refused. Then he said that until I learned what family meant, he hoped relatives would stop inviting me to gatherings where my mother had to pretend not to be hurt by my absence. I wasn't absent. I had been at my parents' house 9 days earlier. I had paid a caregiver bill 4 days earlier. I had spoken to Mom on the phone that morning. My first feeling wasn't anger. It was humiliation. Then I started reading the comments. Some relatives were trying to stay neutral. Some weren't. One person wrote, "So sad when children forget who raised them." Another wrote something about elderly parents being abandoned. Maureen had left a heart under Dad's reply to somebody thanking him for standing by Sylvia. And then I saw a comment from a woman I recognized from one of my kids' school events. Not a close friend, just another parent. She had written, "Sending prayers." That was the moment it stopped feeling like family drama. It had crossed into my children's world. I checked my messages. Lorraine, Mason's mother, had texted 15 minutes earlier. "Sweetheart, I saw something your father posted. Are you okay? You do not have to explain anything to me, but I want you to know I'm here." I was still staring at that when my older child came into the kitchen. "Mom." "Yeah." "Why is Grandpa mad at you online?" I looked up so fast I got dizzy. Apparently another child had overheard 2 parents talking after an activity pickup, and then one of my kids had looked up Grandpa's page. That was it. That was the point where the shame turned into anger. Not because my dad had criticized me, because he had used my mother's illness to make me a public target, and my children were now asking me to explain why their grandfather was telling strangers I was a bad daughter. Mason came home to find me sitting at the kitchen table with the screenshot open. He read the post. His jaw tightened. "What are you going to say?" "Nothing yet." He looked at me like I had lost my mind. "Kinsley." I said not yet. "He named you." "I can read. People from the kids' school saw it." "I know." "So answer him." I shook my head. If I answer wrong, he becomes the victim again. He is already making himself the victim. I know, but if I post while I'm furious, this turns into me screaming about my sick mother's finances on Facebook. Mason paced once across the kitchen. "He cannot just lie about you." "I didn't say he can." "Then what are we doing?" I took a breath. We're not giving him the version of me he wants. Mason stopped. What version is that? The hysterical daughter attacking the exhausted husband caring for his wife. He leaned against the counter. Okay. I need everything. Everything what? Every payment I made. Every bill he asked me to cover. Every text where he asked for money. Everything. That was when I stopped thinking of my silence as endurance and started using it as time. Dad, apparently frustrated that I still hadn't replied publicly, texted me the next day. Since you seem to think I am lying about the care fund, here is where things stand. Attached was a screenshot of the account. He had cropped it. Not very well. The image showed the balance, a few recent charges, and part of the transaction list. His point was supposed to be obvious. The balance was much lower than he wanted. I looked at it and felt guilty for about 30 seconds. Then Mason looked over my shoulder. What's that? What? He took the phone from me and zoomed in. At the very bottom edge of the screenshot, half cut off, was a transaction line. Only part of it was visible. A date. An amount. And the words event deposit. Mason went still. I remember that more than anything. He didn't immediately start talking. He just handed the phone back to me. I stared at the line. No. Kinsley. No. It says event deposit. That could be anything. It could. Mom could have some kind of facility deposit. She doesn't. You don't know that. He gave me a look. I hated that look because it was patient. I know what you're doing, he said. What am I doing? You're trying to come up with a version that hurts less. That made me angry. You don't know what this is. No, I don't. And neither do you. So find out. I wanted him to be wrong. I need to be clear about that. I didn't want a wedding scandal. I didn't want proof that my father had stolen from my mother's care fund. I didn't want to discover that my sister's upgraded wedding had been financed with money people thought was for medical needs. I wanted event deposit to mean something boring. So I checked. The date was the first thing. I opened my bank history in my notebook. 3 days before the event deposit, Dad had texted me that Mom's medications were getting out of hand. That same week, I had paid a pharmacy charge directly. 2 days after the deposit, Fallon had called me, excited because the nicer venue had suddenly become available to them. She said, Dad saved us. I hadn't thought much about it. Now I wrote the date in the notebook. Then I went through my own records. Bank transfer memo, mom meds. Another, care shift. Another bath rail. I found the emailed caregiver invoice Dad had forwarded to me 2 months earlier. I found the receipt from the bathroom safety installer. I found several pharmacy confirmations. I made a list not because I planned to put all of Mom's private information online, but because Dad had publicly claimed I had refused to help. I needed to know exactly what I had done. That night I called Mom. I had spoken to her recently, but the calls had felt off. Shorter. Careful. I had assumed she was tired. This time, after we talked about ordinary things for a few minutes, she said, Kinsley, are you still angry with me? I sat up straight. What? She went quiet. Your father said you needed distance. Distance from what? From all of us. Mom, I never said that. Another pause. He said you didn't want to be involved in the care stuff anymore. My hand tightened around the phone. Did Dad tell you I stopped helping you? He said you were upset about money. I am upset about money. I did not stop helping you. Well, he said you didn't want the responsibility. I closed my eyes. Mom, I paid the caregiver invoice last week. Silence. I paid your medication copays. Silence. I paid for the bathroom rail. I thought your father did. That one hurt. Not because I needed credit. Because it meant Dad hadn't just told relatives I was selfish. He had told my mother I had stepped away. Mom, did you know Dad asked me for $15,000? No. Did you know he has a separate care account? I know he has an account for expenses. Do you know what comes out of it? He handles all that. Her voice changed. She sounded embarrassed. Then she asked, why? I didn't tell her yet. I couldn't. At that point I had one suspicious transaction line and a growing pile of contradictions. I said, I'm trying to understand some things. She got quiet again. Then she said, your father told me Mason thought you should stay out of it. That made my stomach turn. Mason never said that. He said Mason didn't want you getting pulled into family money problems. That is not the same thing. I know. No, Mom. I mean, Dad changed what Mason said. She whispered. I see. When I got off the phone, Mason was waiting in the living room. I didn't say anything at first. He could tell. What did she say? He told her I stopped helping. Mason looked away. He told her you were the reason I was distancing myself. He laughed once, but there was no humor in it. Of course he did. I don't think Mom knew about any of it. The account. The money. The post. What he was saying to everybody. Mason sat beside me. Now do you want to answer him? Not yet. He rubbed his face. I am trying very hard to respect your process. I know. Your process is making me want to put my head through a wall. Despite everything, I laughed. That helped for about 10 seconds. Then my phone buzzed. It was a message from Drew, Fallon's fiancé. Hey, I know things are tense with your dad, but I just wanted to say thank you for helping the family with everything lately. Fallon told me you and your parents had all been contributing in different ways. The venue deposit saved us, and I know Brent really came through. I hope this all gets worked out. I read it once, then again. Then I handed the phone to Mason. He read it. Venue deposit. Yeah. Same week. Yeah. He set the phone down. I'm sorry. That was the moment I believed it. Not because Drew's text was a bank record. Not because one line proved the exact path of every dollar. But because all the pieces suddenly fit. Dad pressured me to send a large amount into an account he controlled. He resisted direct payments. Fallon's wedding expanded. Dad came through. A care account screenshot showed an event deposit on the same timeline. Mom had been told I stopped helping. And now Drew was thanking the family for helping with the venue deposit. I didn't sleep much that night. The next morning I started organizing everything. Not dramatically. No giant presentation. No group chat explosion. No threatening messages. I printed a few things because I think better when I can put dates in front of me. My direct payment records. The caregiver invoice. The bathroom rail invoice. The screenshot Dad sent. The text where he asked for $15,000. The text where I told him I would pay specific care expenses directly. Drew's message. I also went back through my conversation with Fallon. A week before Dad asked me for money, she had complained about a wedding payment deadline. 2 days later she wrote, Dad says not to panic. He found a way to cover it from the family account. At the time I assumed family account meant my parents' household savings. Now it read very differently. I texted her. What family account did Dad use for your deposit? She responded almost immediately. Why? Because I'm asking. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally she wrote, I don't know exactly. Dad said he handled it. Did you know he was calling it Mom's Care Fund? No response. 10 minutes. 20. Then, it was supposed to be temporary. I stared at that sentence. There it was. Not a full confession. Not an explanation. Enough. I wrote back. Temporary from what account? She called me instead. I let it ring once, then answered. You are blowing this way out of proportion, she said. I asked what account. Dad said he could cover it and put it back. From Mom's care account? He said there was money sitting there. For Mom. She didn't need all of it that second. I closed my eyes. Did you know he was asking me for $15,000? No. Did you know he told Mom I stopped helping her? No. Did you know he posted publicly that I chose money over her because I wouldn't send him $15,000? I saw the post. And you said nothing. Kinsley, I didn't write it. You called me selfish the day after he asked me for the money. Because you were making everything worse. For you. For everyone. What does that mean? Her voice cracked with frustration. It means Dad is barely holding things together. Mom is sick. I'm trying to plan a wedding, Drew is stressed, and you keep showing up with questions like you're investigating everybody. That sentence told me more than she intended. I said, maybe somebody should have asked questions before using Mom's care money for your venue. It was a loan. From Mom. Dad controls the account. That is not what I asked. You act like you have never needed help. I have needed help. Exactly. I have never taken money people thought was for Mom's medical care and used it for a wedding. She started crying then, angry crying more than sad crying. You're going to ruin everything. No. I'm going to stop Dad from telling people I abandoned Mom. You could just let this die. He named me publicly. So you're going to humiliate me? I didn't post about your wedding. You will. I didn't answer. She said, you always think being technically right makes you right. Then she hung up. That line stayed with me because it was the first thing anyone in my family said that made me question myself in a real way. Not whether Dad had lied. He had. Not whether the money had been misused. It had. But whether exposing it publicly would make me part of the damage. For 2 days I didn't post anything. I kept paying Mom's legitimate expenses directly. I called the caregiver and arranged to pay invoices myself for the shifts I had agreed to cover. I called the medical supply company. I asked Mom to send me pharmacy notices directly when she could. I also told Mason I didn't want him contacting Dad. He hated that. Why? Because this is my family. I'm your family. You know what I mean. Unfortunately. I gave him a look. He held up his hands. I'm not calling him. Thank you. But if he contacts me, I am not pretending I didn't see what I saw. That's fair. Then Maureen called and invited us to dinner. She said it was time for everyone to get in the same room and stop letting Facebook do the talking. I almost said no. Then she added, your mother wants you there. So I agreed. The dinner was at Maureen's house on a Sunday. Mason came with me. The kids stayed with Lorraine. Fallon and Drew were there. Mom and Dad were already seated when we arrived. The second I walked in, Dad gave me a look that told me he believed this dinner was going to end with me apologizing. He wasn't furious. That would have been easier. He was disappointed. That was his favorite posture. As if he were the calm adult waiting for the difficult child to come to her senses. Maureen had made too much food, the way people do when they are nervous and don't know what else to do with their hands. For the first 20 minutes, everyone pretended we were having a normal dinner. Drew asked Mason about a home repair. Maureen talked about a neighbor. Mom barely ate. Fallon kept checking her phone. Dad waited. Finally Maureen set down her fork and said, we should probably talk. Dad folded his hands. I agree. I almost smiled. He looked at me. Kinsley, this has gone far enough. I said nothing. He continued. I have been trying to hold this family together while your mother needs peace. You turned a request for help into an accusation. I haven't accused you publicly of anything. You've been talking to people. I answered questions from people you contacted. He frowned. This isn't about technicalities. That was apparently the phrase of the week. He went on. You made your mother feel like a burden. Mom looked at him. I saw it. A tiny shift. Dad didn't. He was still focused on me. You have always had this need to control how things are done, he said. I asked for help. You made me justify myself like some stranger. I kept my voice level. You asked me for $15,000. For your mother. And I asked what expenses it was for. Here we go again. No. You brought us here. Maureen started to say something but Dad lifted his hand. He looked at me and said, "If you apologize publicly for the impression you created and stop questioning every decision I make, I am willing to take my post down." Mason inhaled sharply beside me. I touched his knee under the table. Not to calm him because he was wrong. To remind him I wanted to do this myself. I looked at Dad. "You want me to apologize under the post where you said I chose money over Mom?" "Yes." "And you want me to say you were right?" "I want you to admit that you made an already painful situation worse." I opened the bag I had brought with me. Dad looked annoyed. Fallon looked scared. Mom looked confused. I took out the first page. "This is the caregiver invoice I paid 8 days before your post." Dad's expression changed. "Only slightly." I put down another. "These are Mom's medication copays." Another. "This is the bathroom rail." Another. "This is a medical supply delivery." I looked at Maureen. These are the things I was paying while Dad was telling people I had stopped helping. Maureen picked up the caregiver invoice. Dad said, "Nobody said you did nothing. You wrote that I refused to help my sick mother. I said you chose money over her. What is that supposed to mean if not that I refused to help?" He leaned back. "You refused the amount I said we needed. Because I shouldn't have to. That's the part we disagree on." Fallon finally spoke. "Can we not do this like a courtroom?" I looked at her. "You were fine with Facebook." "I didn't post it." "No. You just called me selfish after Dad asked for the money." She looked away. Dad said, "This is exactly what I mean. You are taking a hard time and turning everyone against each other." Mom spoke for the first time. "Brent." He turned. She said, "Did you tell me Kinsley stopped helping?" His face tightened. "I told you she wanted distance." "That is not what I asked." He rubbed his forehead. "Sylvia, I was trying to protect you from stress. You told me she stopped helping?" I said she was upset. Mom looked at the invoices in front of me. "You told me she didn't want to be involved." Dad's tone sharpened. "I was the one here dealing with everything. I was trying to keep this family together." Mom didn't answer. I took out my phone. "Dad, when you texted me the screenshot of the care fund, you cropped the bottom." He looked at me. "No, I didn't." Mason spoke for the first time. "You did." Dad turned toward him. "This is between me and my daughter." Mason's voice stayed calm. "She is handling it. I'm confirming what I saw." I put the screenshot on the table. I had printed it larger so the transaction line was visible. Maureen leaned closer. Fallon stopped moving. Drew looked from her to the paper. I pointed to the bottom. "Event deposit." Dad said nothing. I continued. "That transaction happened the same week Fallon's venue deposit was paid." Dad shook his head. "You have no idea what you're talking about." Drew said, "That's the venue." Everyone looked at him. He pointed. "That wording, that's the venue." Fallon whispered, "Drew." He looked at her. "What?" She shook her head. He stared at her now. "Fallon," Dad said. "It was temporary." That sentence changed the room. Not because anyone gasped. Nobody did. It was worse than that. People just stopped pretending. Maureen looked at him. "Temporary." Dad's face flushed. There was money in the account that wasn't immediately needed. Fallon had a deadline. I was going to replace it. "With what?" I asked. He snapped. "With my money. You were asking me for $15,000. Not for the wedding. Then show us what the $15,000 was for." "Enough." "No." He stared at me. I had almost never said no to him like that. Not loudly. Not emotionally. Just no. I picked up another printout. "This is Fallon's text." She stood up. "Kinsley." I read only the relevant line. Dad says not to panic. He found a way to cover it from the family account. Fallon's face went red. "That doesn't say care fund." "No. Your later message does." She froze. Drew looked at her. What later message? I didn't read it aloud. I slid my phone toward him. He read the screen. It was supposed to be temporary. He looked at Fallon. You knew. I knew Dad borrowed money. From your mom's care account? I didn't know all the details. You knew enough to say it was temporary. I knew he said he would replace it. Drew pushed his chair back slightly. He wasn't yelling. He looked embarrassed. That almost made it worse. Dad started talking fast. This is what happens when people who don't understand the full financial picture start pulling individual transactions out of context. Maureen said, then explain the context. He looked at her. She had been one of the people who believed him. That was why her question mattered. If this is all a misunderstanding, she said, why did money from Sylvia's care account go to Fallon's wedding venue? Dad's mouth tightened. It was a family decision. Mom looked at him. No, it wasn't. He turned to her. Sylvia. No. She looked exhausted. Not dramatic. Just tired in a way I hadn't seen before. I didn't know. Dad lowered his voice. You had enough going on. You didn't tell me. I was trying to spare you. You told me Kinsley stopped helping. I told you she was creating conflict. You used me to punish her. Nobody said anything after that. Dad's face changed. For 1 second, he didn't look like the father who had controlled every family conversation for years. He just looked old. Then his anger came back. He pointed at me. You see what you've done? That almost made me laugh. What I've done? You came in here with documents. You embarrassed your sister. You upset your mother. You dragged Mason into it. You have turned a private family matter into an investigation. You posted about me publicly. Because you abandoned your responsibilities. I tapped the invoices. I did not. You refused the fund. I refused your access to my money without explanation. You always make everything about control. I looked at him. No, you do. He went quiet. I didn't feel victorious. That surprised me. I had imagined that if I ever finally proved him wrong in front of everyone, I would feel some huge release. Instead, I felt sad. Because proving him wrong meant proving something worse about him. I took a breath. I'm going to keep helping Mom. Dad scoffed. On your terms. Yes. He blinked. I continued. I will pay providers directly. I'll cover the expenses I agreed to cover. I'll pay the pharmacy. I'll pay caregiver invoices. I'll pay for equipment if Mom needs it. I am not putting money into an account you control. You don't get to dictate that. I get to dictate where my money goes. What about the rest of the family? They can do whatever they want with theirs. I looked at Maureen. If anyone wants to help Mom, I'll share the provider information with Mom's permission. They can pay directly too. Dad's face hardened. So you're cutting me off. I'm not cutting off Mom. I'm cutting off your access to money in her name. That was the closest thing I said all night to a polished line, and even then it didn't feel satisfying. It felt final. Fallon started crying again. This is insane. What am I supposed to do now? Drew turned toward her. We scale back. She stared at him. What? We scale back the wedding. We can't. Yes, we can. We'll lose deposits. He nodded toward the paper. We already have a deposit problem. She looked humiliated. Then she looked at me. You could have talked to me before doing this. I did talk to you. Not like this. You admitted you knew it was temporary. You knew what I meant. No, I knew what you wrote. She wiped her face. You are ruining my wedding because you hate that Mom and Dad helped me. That was the old accusation. Jealousy. Scorekeeping. I had heard versions of it my whole life. I said, your wedding is not my responsibility. You don't care. I care that you were put in a bad position. Her expression softened for half a second. Then I added, but I'm not going to fix it with Mom's care money. The softness disappeared. Drew looked down at the table. Mom asked him quietly, Did you know? He shook his head. No. He looked at Fallon. I knew Brent helped. I didn't know where it came from. Fallon said. I didn't think it was going to stay out of the account. Mom closed her eyes. That was the moment I think Fallon finally understood that this wasn't just about me embarrassing her. Her mother was sitting across from her. Realizing money set aside in her name had been used for a wedding she thought Dad was paying for himself. The dinner ended without a resolution. Dad left angry. Fallon left angry. Drew barely spoke on the way out. Maureen hugged Mom for a long time. Mason and I drove home in silence. Halfway there, he said, I'm sorry I found that. I turned to him. What? The deposit. Part of me keeps thinking if I hadn't noticed it, maybe you wouldn't be dealing with all this. I looked out the window. If you hadn't noticed it, Dad would still be telling Mom I stopped helping. He nodded. He'd probably still be telling everyone else too. Yeah. Mason rested one hand on the steering wheel. I wanted to blow the whole thing up the first night. I know. You were right not to. I don't know if I was right. You were careful. That doesn't mean right. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, You're allowed to still hate how this happened. That was probably the most useful thing anyone said to me during the whole mess. The next morning, Dad's Facebook post was still up. That mattered. If he had taken it down after dinner, I might have left it alone. I don't know. Maybe I would have. But he left it up. Worse, he added a comment saying family matters were being distorted by people who value paperwork over sacrifice. That was when I decided he had made the choice for me. I wrote a response. It was short. I did not post Mom's diagnosis. I did not post her medication names. I did not post every bank record. I did not mention the amount of every expense. I wrote that I had not stopped supporting my mother and had continued paying care expenses directly. I wrote that I declined to send $15,000 into an account without itemized expenses. I wrote that after my father publicly accused me of choosing money over my mother, we confirmed that money from the account described as her care fund had been used for a wedding venue deposit. I attached a redacted image of the relevant transaction line and redacted proof of several direct care payments. Then I ended with one sentence. I will continue helping my mother directly, but I will not send money through an account that has been used for expenses unrelated to her care. I read it 5 times. Mason read it once. Post it. I did. My hands shook afterward. That annoyed me. I had wanted to feel calm. Instead, I felt like I had just jumped off something high. The response spread quickly because Dad's original post had already spread quickly. Some relatives deleted their earlier comments. A few messaged me privately. One apologized directly. A couple did not. One person told me I should have kept financial details private, no matter what Dad had posted. That bothered me more than I expected because there was a part of me that agreed. I didn't enjoy exposing any of it. I still don't. I just couldn't find a private solution to a public lie that Dad refused to correct. Maureen called me later that day. I owe you an apology, she said. You don't owe me anything. I believed him. That's not a crime. I left that stupid heart on his comment. I almost laughed. I survived. I should have asked you. I didn't say, yes, you should have. I said, he's convincing when he's hurt. She was quiet. Then she said, I asked your mom if she wants help setting up payments directly. That mattered more to me than the apology. Yes, I said. That would help. Dad called me 6 times that day. I didn't answer. Then he texted. You have humiliated this family enough. Call me. I didn't. The next morning. We need to discuss what you posted. I replied. If there is something factually incorrect, text me what it is. He never did. Instead, he asked to meet privately. I said no. Not forever. Just then. Because I knew what private meant in my family. It meant no witnesses and no written record. It meant tone could replace facts. It meant I could be told I remembered things wrong. For years, I had believed keeping conflict private was the same as protecting the family. Now I understood that privacy had mostly protected Dad's version of events. The fallout with Fallon was uglier. Drew told her he was not comfortable moving forward with all the original wedding expenses until they knew exactly what money had been used and what needed to be returned. They didn't cancel the wedding. That would have been dramatic and unnecessary. They cut things. The upgraded floral package went. The extra bar option went. A decor rental went. The guest favors Fallon had insisted were essential disappeared. They changed a few things to cheaper versions and pushed one payment deadline. She blamed me for every one of those changes. She sent me a long message saying I had always resented her because Mom and Dad helped her. She said I could have let Dad replace the money. She said I had chosen the worst possible time to prove a point. I wrote back once. Dad accused me publicly of abandoning Mom while using Mom's care money for your venue. I didn't choose the timing. She responded, "You could have protected me." I stared at that sentence for a long time. That was our entire relationship in 5 words. You could have protected me. She didn't mean protected her from danger. She meant protected her from consequences. I had done it for years. Covered forgotten responsibilities. Absorbed awkward costs. Stayed quiet when she was favored because challenging it would upset Mom. Fixed things because I was the strong one. This time I didn't. I wrote, "I'm not going to lie for you." Then I stopped responding. Mom's situation changed more slowly. She was hurt. Not just at Dad. At herself. She called me 3 days after the dinner and cried. "I should have asked you. You didn't know. I should have known. Mom." I believed him when he said you didn't want to help. I sat at the kitchen table with my notebook open. You were sick and tired. Dad was the person next to you. Of course you believed him. That doesn't make me feel better. I know. She was quiet. Then she said, "Were you angry with me?" "A little." She breathed in. "Okay. But not because you were sick. I know. And not because you needed help. I know. I was angry because I kept showing up, and somehow I still ended up being the daughter who abandoned you." She started crying again. "I'm sorry." I didn't tell her it was fine. It wasn't. I also didn't punish her for it. We started over in a more practical way. She began forwarding me invoices herself when she could. The caregiver sent me bills directly. Maureen offered to cover some medical supply deliveries. Another relative offered to pay for a few care shifts. Nobody sent that money through Dad. Dad hated that. He called it undermining. Mom called it easier. That distinction said a lot. The care fund itself became a major point of conflict between my parents. I was not involved in every detail and I didn't want to be. What I know is that Mom insisted the remaining money be used only for her care, with clearer records. Dad eventually stopped controlling it alone. Not because he suddenly agreed with me. Because too many people were asking the same question Maureen had asked at dinner. Where did the money go? That was the irony. Dad had used Facebook to control the story. But by making the accusation public, he created a public reason for people to look more closely. If he had never posted about me, I might have kept arguing with him privately for months. I might have kept paying direct bills and ignoring the account. I might never have looked at the bottom edge of that screenshot. A few weeks later, Dad finally got me on the phone. I answered because Mom had asked me to at least hear him out. He did not apologize. Not exactly. He said, "Things got out of hand." I said, "You posted my name." I was upset. "You asked relatives to stop inviting me." I was trying to make you understand how serious this was. You told Mom I stopped helping her. I was under pressure. You used her care account for Fallon's venue. I said I was going to replace it. With what? He went quiet. Then he said, "You think you've never made a mistake?" There it was. The family escape hatch. If nobody is perfect, nobody can be held accountable. I make mistakes all the time. So maybe you could show a little grace. Grace for what? For how much I've been carrying. I know you've been carrying a lot. That surprised him. His voice softened. Then you understand. No. The softness disappeared. Kinsley, I understand you're stressed. I understand caring for Mom is hard. I understand Fallon's wedding added pressure. None of that made the Facebook post true. You embarrassed me. You embarrassed me first. That's childish. No, it's factual. He sighed. Are you going to keep punishing us forever? I'm not punishing you. You won't give me money. I'll pay for Mom's care directly. That is control. That is my boundary. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, You've changed. I almost told him no. The truth was I had. Not in the way he meant. I had stopped confusing endurance with loyalty. I had stopped assuming that if I could tolerate one more insult, one more emergency, one more vague money request, then eventually everyone would recognize how much I cared. I didn't say any of that. I just said, yes. We ended the call a few minutes later. Our relationship has not gone back to normal. I don't know if it ever will. Fallon and I are civil at family events. Drew and I are fine. He actually apologized to me for the text thanking us for the deposit because he said he felt stupid afterward. I told him he had nothing to apologize for. He didn't know. Fallon knew more than he did. How much more is still something she and I disagree about. She says she knew Dad had borrowed from a family account, but didn't understand it was money people thought was specifically for Mom's care. I believe she didn't understand every detail. I also believe she understood enough to avoid asking questions because the answer might interfere with her wedding. Both things can be true. Dad still thinks I made the situation bigger than it needed to be. A few relatives agree with him. They say I should have handled it privately. I asked them what private action they think would have corrected a public accusation he refused to take down. Nobody has given me an answer yet. The hardest consequence was the kids. They know their grandfather said something hurtful about me online. We did not explain the entire financial situation. They don't need that. We told them adults can love each other and still make bad choices, and that Grandpa said something about Mom that wasn't true. My older child asked, "Did he say sorry?" I said, "Not really." "Then are you still mad?" I thought about it. "I'm careful." That was the best answer I had. Lorraine was a little less diplomatic. She told Mason that if my father ever dragged the kids into another public family fight, she would discover a very unchristian vocabulary. I told her I appreciated the restraint. Mom and I are closer in some ways now, but it's not a sentimental movie ending. Trust doesn't repair itself because the facts came out. Sometimes she still defends Dad. Sometimes I get frustrated. Sometimes she asks me not to be so hard on Fallon. Sometimes I tell her I'm not discussing Fallon. The difference is that we can talk about what is actually happening. No middleman. No rewritten messages. No, your father said you meant this. When Mom needs something and I can help, I help. Directly. The spiral notebook is still in my kitchen drawer. It looks ridiculous for how much importance it ended up having. Cheap paper. Bent cover. Coffee stain near the back. Medication refill dates. Caregiver shifts. Invoices. Phone numbers. For years, that notebook represented the role I thought I had to perform. The competent daughter. The one who remembers. The one who pays. The one who doesn't make a scene. The one who can take it. Now I still write things down, but I use it differently. Last week, I wrote the date of Mom's next medication delivery and the amount I paid directly to the provider. Under that, I wrote the caregiver's schedule. Then I closed the notebook and put it back in the drawer. I didn't take a picture of it for Dad. I didn't send proof to Fallon. I didn't save it in case somebody needed to be convinced I was a good daughter. Mom had what she needed. That was enough. If you liked it, don't forget to leave a comment and support the channel by subscribing. See you in the upcoming stories.